Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and you see what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. As a result of the shooting of 18-year-old Michael Brown, there have been consistent, sustained protests, civil disobedience, and all kinds of other developments that are highly unusual for this situation. And one of the people that I try to talk to when I want to get a sense of a police perspective, as well as a very pure, very practical, very accurate legal analysis and understanding of what might be going on, is Mr. Ken Williams. Ken is an expert witness. He also testifies at a lot of wrongful death trials. He's a former police officer. He's just a good brother. So I want to ask Ken, how you doing today, man?
Hey, how's it going, Doctor? Thank you for having me again.
I'm glad you're here, man. It's getting to be mission critical out in Missouri. From what I understand, the autopsy report was released. It showed that Michael Brown was shot 6 times. From what I understand, none of the shots came from the back, but still 6 times nonetheless. There are also reports that police are really becoming very forceful with the citizens. A mutual friend of ours, a person you introduced me to, Mr. Alex Salazar, another former officer who's there in Ferguson supporting the protesters, says actually he texted me and told me that he was actually hit in the testicles with a missile, and that the police have used excessive force with him as well. What is your take on this? What's going on here?
Well, I mean, the police, we're into the seventh day, past the seventh day since the murder of Michael Brown. The citizens in Ferguson, they're protesting because they want justice. All that has to happen for the people to go away is for the police to arrest the murderer of Michael Brown. Everyone would go home then. They're out in the streets and they're protesting each and every day because they're looking at this situation that's unfolding in Ferguson, and everyone speculated in the beginning that something wasn't quite right. The people who were eyewitnesses of Michael Brown's murder, they've been saying all week long what they saw. So that wasn't speculation, that was their eyewitness testimony. They said that they saw an officer who is supposed to protect and serve commit acts that looked egregious, looked unlawful, and ultimately caused the death of Mr. Michael Brown. Now, the autopsy report, which is an independent report by a former New York State medical examiner, Dr. Michael Baden, has analyzed for the family as an independent expert scientific witness, has analyzed the autopsy report to give the family some reassurance about what's going on, because obviously the family did not trust the medical examiner in Missouri, the state medical examiner. Now, what was interesting was recently the DOJ, Attorney General Eric Holder, has also said that under their investigation, they asked for permission to conduct their own examination of Mr. Michael Brown's remains as well. So you have these different layers of different people who are saying publicly they don't trust the institution in Missouri to get this right. If the state police, the county police, and the Ferguson police want everyone to go home, make an arrest. It's that simple.
Wow. So you're saying that much of this, and Dr. Baden, the man who did the autopsy, he kind of confirms a lot of what you just said. That it sounds like they're making the situation worse than it needs to be. They didn't reveal information. They were incredibly unforthcoming. I think even Dr. Baden said on day one you could have at least told them how many times he got shot. You didn't even tell them that. And then you hear these reports of this militarization, this crazy use of force against American citizens, using weapons that even the St. Louis County Police have admitted that they're not very good at using yet. They didn't even install the dash cams yet that they'd received, let alone all the other stuff they got from the Pentagon, which is a whole other issue. And then you're saying that their reluctance, their unwillingness to arrest the man who killed Michael Brown, that right there says that, as you, and this goes back to what you had said a while back when this first started. You said that this looks like a police cover-up. So, you know, what happens now? I mean, it seems like it's getting kind of out of control. I mean, I'm getting texts from people that are saying, I'm going to Ferguson now, so now you've got all these people from all over the country that are descending on the city. This is a small town, 20,000 people. You've got, these federal agencies that are all involved. How does this end in a way that does not uh, become worse? Because I'm thinking that if somebody gets killed, then all hell will break loose. I mean, what do you think it will be the next step to keep people safe?
Well, I mean, let's take a look at the medical examiner's report. I mean, there's going to be some findings in this report that are going to be troublesome for the community because the community is looking for transparency. And even Dr. Baden's report, he's saying that as a medical examiner, I'm a former law enforcement officer with homicide experience. I've been to autopsies at the medical examiner's office. So when I read through Dr. Baden's explanation as to why his preliminary report isn't as complete as he would like it to be, he says, I can't make a further assessment because the police have not supplied me their reports. They have not supplied me the witness reports. And a medical examiner isn't an eyewitness to a crime. So the medical examiner relies on the police to provide information so that they can make their assessment for final determination on manner of death, some of the things that might have caused death, and a final decision. For instance, Dr. Baden says 6 entry wounds, bullet wounds. The one that was at the very top of the skull was a fatal wound. Okay, but he says, let's go through it real quick. In his diagram that he released to the New York Times, it's it's a sketch of a human being with the arms down by the side. All right. Now, I'm a former, like I said, homicide investigator. If Dr. Baden is to go and take the opinion of witnesses that the arms are actually up like this and not down by the side, and we go through the numbers as far as the sight picture and the shot picture that the officer had at the very end of Mr. Brown's life, we have one entry that's near the thumb. We have one entry that's in the forearm. We have another entry that's just in the bicep muscle, and another entry that's near the top of the bicep. Then the next entry is in the eye. The last entry is in the skull, the top of the skull. When you think about this sight picture that the officer is shooting, what I want you to think about is the entry that Dr. Baden has described in his diagram, the thumb entry. That's critical because if the man's hands are down like this, how did he get hit in the thumb up here? His hands are up when this shot is taken. The shot that goes into the eye and into the skull, it goes into the right eye and it goes and impacts into the brain area, a fatal wound probably. This fatal wound up in the top that Dr. Baden's describing, he says, I can't determine if, in his report, if perhaps even Mr. Michael Brown was either at the end or sometime during this altercation charging, which might have caused this. But let's back this up for a minute, and we go by the eyewitness statements. Mr. Brown, at the end of his life, he has his hands up, he's pleading for his life, he takes a shot to the eye. The body at that point naturally starts to go forward. He then takes the shot to the skull before he falls on the ground. The pictures that are showing Mr. Brown on the ground don't show his hands as if he was reaching for his waistband. That wouldn't explain why he has wounds to his hand. His hand can only be up physically to have that type of wound. Because when his body went forward and fell on the ground, his hands aren't underneath his body, which means that at the last moment of his life, because his hands are out to the side when he falls to the ground, that in itself is physical evidence that police know in Ferguson this man was not reaching before he died for anything. His hands were up, The physical evidence supports that. Why haven't they arrested this officer is absurd.
Hmm. Wow. Wow. It's funny. It's very rare that I'm speechless, but you've actually, said so much that I don't actually have another question to ask you about this because, from where I'm looking at things right now, it's just incredulous that this department has continued to just defy logic in terms of how they're responding to this. Um, I think the most problematic part of all of this is the lack of information release, and I'm just dying to find out what's going on here. Is there a more uh, interesting story happening in the background? Does this corruption go to the top and affect other people in the department? Is that why they're protecting him? Is that why they're being so obstructive at this point? Do you think that the federal agencies will have the ability to create more transparency in the way this investigation is being conducted?
See, the problem that I have that the media has not quite brought out, that I'm glad you asked that question, that we need to clear up. The FBI is tasked for looking at federal crimes. They don't investigate local homicides, not unless it involves mass murder or something unusual. Then they investigate. They're investigating for civil rights violations. They're investigating for pattern and practice, possibly at the police department, for prior acts. They're looking at Mr. Michael Brown's situation to determine whether or not the officer said nigger before or during the time that he was shooting him, did he say nigger to give them the intent that he was, using racial bias towards Mr. Brown before he was gunned down. But that has nothing to do with the homicide investigation. The homicide investigation is the responsibility of the local PD or the county police who are tasked to investigate the homicide. The people are upset because the homicide investigators aren't doing their job, because if Dr. Baden doesn't have access to the local PD reports regarding the shooting death of Michael Brown, that to me says that there's no cooperation with anyone trying to show that Officer Wilson killed somebody. And he killed Mr. Brown with deliberate intent, and that it was not a matter of, Officer Wilson at the 35 feet from his cruiser felt that he was in imminent death or had a threat of death. He killed him because, based on eyewitness testimony, he killed him because he's a cold-blooded murderer. Period.
Okay, well, here's something I'm going to ask as a devil's advocate to try to just open up this discussion on this issue. You know, if this officer wanted to kill him, and we know that black men get killed by officers more than anybody else, um, then what is it about this situation that may or may not have led him to do something that he's never, at least based on the information we have, he's never done before? I mean, he doesn't have a track record of killing black people, beating up, and I don't know about the complaints, but from what I understand, there aren't many complaints on him from previous behavior. He was actually commended for being an extraordinary officer, which we know that doesn't mean a whole lot given the dysfunctionality of their police department, but it does sometimes mean something. And I'm curious, your take, just your intuitive take, as a former officer and also as a human being, as an African American. How do you conjoin the two? How do you conjoin the fact that, for example, if there are cookies missing in the cookie jar, and you know that I love cookies and you've seen me eat cookies before, then it's easy to say, I think you stole those cookies. But if I'm a vegetarian, or you've never seen me eat a cookie in my life, and I've even told you I don't like cookies, what would make you say, no, I know that this particular time you wanted those cookies and you took them? Like, I guess that's a silly analogy, but my point is, if he's never killed a black man before, then what is it that would lead us? I know we have our emotional reaction. Our emotional reaction is he's a racist. He wanted to kill this black man. He just, decided to just level off and commit a murder in broad daylight. And that to me is a more Hollywood explanation, right? We want to believe that every racist is just a cold-hearted, nasty, cold-blooded killer, and sometimes that's true. But in this particular case, I wonder if it's more subtle than that. What do you think could have been going through this officer's mind that led him to unload 6 bullets into an unarmed man?
Certainly. I mean, it's a great question, and one thing about his intent, because he's not spoken publicly about his intent, we can't speculate what goes on in his mind. But what we do have are the eyewitness accounts. We have Dorian that was out there, and Dorian says that he and another young black male were walking down the road when an officer passed them. There was some sort of verbal exchange about get out of the road, and Dorian and his friend Michael Brown said, "We're just a minute away, officer. We're going to get out of the road in just a second." Officer passed them up in his SUV and then immediately put the thing in reverse. And according to what is visible in crime scene, partitioned his vehicle diagonally in the road. That is the first encounter. So what would make a person back up? You're driving down a road, kids are in the projects, they're about to get home. What would cause you to back up immediately? We had to wait for Officer Wilson to explain that. The chief of the police in Ferguson has changed and deviated his story, trying to play this out in the media as it goes along to see what story works well. The police chief at first said Officer Wilson had no idea what occurred 10 minutes prior at a variety store regarding some cigars, and that Officer Wilson explained to the police department he stopped 2 people based on jaywalking. Then later on in the day, after that explanation played out and he got some feedback, he realized, wow, you know what? It would be really nice to tie this back to maybe we can elevate a shoplifting to a strong arm robbery. And if we elevate it to a strong arm robbery and we have a felony, now we have the officer backing up because he's trying to grab a robbery suspect or a robbery person that's fitting a description of a suspect. And then that is what led to Mr. Brown's intent is to get away, and the officer is trying to save the day. That is not what Mr. Dorian is saying occurred. The eyewitness Dorian, who's next to Mr. Brown, says the vehicle backs up, the officer grabs Mr. Brown by his neck, and that at that point in time, a struggle does occur. At some point in time during that struggle, a gunshot is discharged from the officer at his friend. And that Dorian says, I believe that Mike Brown was struck by that gunshot. The 2 ran, according to the eyewitness. Other eyewitnesses are saying, we see the people running from the police officer get out of his car, and within a 35 feet span from the vehicle, from gunshot scene number 1, we see an officer unload on a black youth citizen with his hands up, ultimately killing him. Now, the cookie example that you just gave is, how do I know you did it if there's no one else around? In the case of Officer Wilson, he didn't operate in a vacuum. It was broad daylight, plenty of youth, plenty of people that were walking about in this project area with plenty of housing and windows around. Plenty of eyewitnesses that came forward and said to police what they saw was Officer Wilson gunned down a man with his hands up. We now have an ME report, that's an independent report from Dr. Baden, that substantiates from this wound in this right hand, a hand was up. So when we put all of these dots together and we parse them all out, we get a straight line. And in that straight line, we point to Officer Wilson. His intent was he was upset for whatever reason. And he may have had a good reason to stop Mr. Brown at his cruiser. Mr. Brown might have even slugged him in his face trying to break away from Officer Wilson. And Officer Wilson, as we've discussed in the past, we can give him a benefit of doubt at the cruiser that he felt that his life was in danger. Once he left that cruiser, and Dorian and Mr. Brown are running separately for their lives because Officer Wilson has his gun out. Officer Wilson has the control, he has the authority, and he has the decision making at that moment in time to either save life, take life, do whatever he wants. He's in power. And Officer Wilson decided with a man standing with his hands up to gun him down multiple times until he died. That's what we have here.
Well, interesting. It's so unfortunate, and it's one of those situations where you just say, I really would like to hear more from the officer. And the problem, the question I have is whether or not people are going to actually listen one way or the other. Um, I mean, I think that we can form conclusions based on the information we have, but as new information is released, are we open to consider all the possibilities here? I don't see most situations like this in terms of black and white. I'm trying to really just understand what's the history of this officer, what was going on here, because you and I, our mutual friend Alex Salazar, we talked about the trauma, the really untreated trauma that some officers may feel and or go through that leads to this kind of fear, that leads to this overreaction, which is a problem, right? Which means, okay, if you overreact, you deserve to be prosecuted, of course, but at the same time, I'm just trying to really see it for what it is. It doesn't mean that that it's that anybody's going to necessarily be right or wrong one way or the other. But I just want to see the truth. I don't want to see the politics of it. And I guess that's my way of explaining why I'm asking so many strange questions here. But based on what's been going on so far, we know the police department's handled it very poorly. We know that it definitely appears that this guy did something illegal. And it is what it is until they tell us something different. So we'll see how it develops. I'm sure Monday or Tuesday they'll be doing another press conference. So you and I will talk again.
Well, one last word. I mean, the protesters are out there and they're demanding justice. The protesters should be out there demanding that this chief of Ferguson Police Department be terminated. They need to go and add that to their agenda because the chief of police is responsible for setting policy. He's responsible for signing off on the administrative leave of Officer Wilson. He also, based on one of his press releases, used to be the internal affairs investigator for the same police department for Ferguson. So this is a man that's well established, has a lot of experience in the police department, and for a person of his caliber on Friday to take a stand where he was going to release the name of Officer Wilson, but wrap it up in this unrelated, situation that occurred at a convenience store, and try to trump that up as some, armed robbery type thing, is poor judgment on his part. Is not protecting and serving the community well because when the captain from the Missouri State Police took over, he was able to quell some of this animosity that existed between police and the citizens. He was able to open up lines of communication between citizens and police. The chief's position, and it's just my perspective, was to make sure that this black captain that stepped in and was quelling these disturbances and handling some of the complaints by these citizens made that chief look bad. And it just appears his belief was, if I release this information and it causes more disturbances in the community, then that takes the captain down a couple notches and doesn't make it look like he's inept. That's my opinion. He should be fired.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a foregone conclusion. No matter what all the facts are, we know that one fact is that they've handled this whole situation so poorly. I mean, even the medical examiner said, you could have at least told people how many times he got shot. This is coming out to be a Keystone Cops kind of situation, except you're talking about Keystone Cops with Pentagon issued military equipment, which is kind of a scary thing. We'll see how it goes, man. And as usual, I appreciate all your expertise on this. Thank you so much.
No problem, doctor. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And everybody, this is Mr. Ken Williams. He is a former police officer. He did 20 years with the Brockton Police Department in Massachusetts. He's a former homicide investigator. He's now an expert witness. He works on a lot of wrongful death suits similar to this one, which is why I was so eager to talk to him. And his website is kwillservices.com. That's kwillservices.com. So you should go check that out. And I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins. Maybe you know me, maybe you don't. But until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.